In the turbulent aftermath of World War II, one event stood out with a stark brutality that echoed the violence of the era: the execution of Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy. Mussolini, or Il Duce, as he was later known, the leader who promised to restore Italy to its ancient glory, found himself hunted, despised, and ultimately captured by those he once ruled. On the 28th of April 1945, Mussolini was brutally executed, shot alongside his lover without trial. The two corpses were dumped in the busy streets of Milan, where many enraged members of the public subjected them to acts of extreme deprivation, mutilating and degrading them beyond belief. With this, the Italian people would take 20 years' worth of bloody revenge on the man who had wished for himself to be their new 20th century Caesar. Benito Mussolini ruled fascist Italy with an iron fist, assuming dictatorial powers after an impassioned speech in January of 1925. He would rule in this capacity for almost 20 years. His reign would forever change Italy, and fascist elements of his government would continue to hold a degree of power for decades after the fall of his dictatorship. Mussolini built his new Italy on the legend of ancient Rome, and, like his spiritual successor, Julius Caesar, his reign would end with his death at the hands of his many unhappy enemies. Born into humble beginnings to a blacksmith father and a schoolteacher mother, Mussolini was exposed to radical politics from a young age. His father was a staunch socialist, and as a boy, Mussolini idolized the 19th century Italian nationalists, who unified the country for the first time in over 1,000 years. These men would go on to shape his desire for a strong, powerful Italy. From powerful to powerless, fascism crumbles. After an 18-year reign where any opposition was crushed with extreme violence, Mussolini would find his power gone. In July of 1943, the King of Italy, Victor Emmanuel III, and Mussolini's own Grand Council of Fascism made a declaration of no confidence and had Il Duce overthrown and arrested. In a turn of events that would seal Mussolini's fate, German forces occupied northern Italy and freed Mussolini from captivity, sending him to the occupied north. He now ruled over the Italian Social Republic, a puppet state covering only the northernmost half of Italy, with its capital in the small and important town of Salo. This unrecognized nation was nominally controlled by Mussolini, but in reality, it was nothing more than an extension of Nazi Germany. Much of his army was now fighting on the other side. He no longer had the support of the king, and his government only had limited control over half of the country. Large parts of his nation were occupied by foreign enemies who wished to capture him, while many of his own countrymen wanted him dead. As allies fought their way further north, the German garrisons in the so-called Republic of Salo fled. With the German forces gone, the socialist partisans, who had been a thorn in the side of fascist Italy for decades, declared a popular uprising and issued Mussolini's death warrant. He and his family were no longer safe. Any power they had once possessed was gone. He no longer had the power of the state on his side, and so he planned to escape, hoping to cross the border into neutral Switzerland. On the 25th of April, 1945, the convoy carrying Mussolini, his mistress, and other high-ranking fascists was attacked by members of the CLNAI, or National Liberation Committee for Northern Italy. A deal was struck with the German guards, who handed over their Italian passengers in return for being allowed to proceed unharmed. The captured fascists, numbering over 50 high-ranking officials and their families, would be taken to nearby Dongo, where they would be held in the local barracks. As the fighting was still ongoing in the area, partisans feared fascist supporters might attempt to rescue Mussolini. Because of this, he and his lover, Clara Patacci, were sent to stay in the unassuming farmhouse of a local peasant family and kept under close guard. Despite having been captured by his mortal enemies, there was still a chance that Mussolini would survive long enough to be tried as a war criminal in a legitimate court. The leader of the partisans in the north declared, "He must be handed over to a tribunal of the people so it can judge him quickly. We want this, even though we think an execution platoon is too much of an honor for this man. He would deserve to be killed like a mangy dog." Despite this statement, on the 26th of April, his execution was ordered. The order would read, "Only one thing is needed to decide that they must pay with their lives: the question of their identity." With this, the death of Mussolini at the end of his reign of terror were at hand, and there was no chance this time of a German rescue. There are many differing accounts as to his death, but the most credible story of the gruesome event comes from Walter Andisio, one of the two men ordered to carry out the execution. The death of a tyrant. The executioners arrived to collect Mussolini and Claretta on the 28th of April. They then traveled 20 kilometers to the village of Giuliano. Having reached their destination, the captives were ordered out of the vehicle and sent to stand against the wall of a nearby villa. The sentence of death was read out, and at 4:10 p.m., Duce let off a burst of gunfire. Mussolini was dead, hit 9 or 7 times. But this was not the end of his suffering, as he would go on to be brutalized even after death. The corpses were taken to Milan, where they were dumped unceremoniously on the streets of the Piazzale Loreto. By the following morning, large crowds had arrived to take their own deeply personal revenge. The bodies were pelted with vegetables, shot at, urinated on, and beaten. American witnesses described the crowds as depraved and out of control. After some time, the bodies were hung from the feet upside down. Those who hung the bodies claimed this was to protect them from the bloodthirsty mob, but the hanging of bodies upside down has been used in northern Italy for centuries to emphasize the infamy of those condemned. Upon the arrival of American authorities, the bodies were removed and sent to the city mortuary. The Americans wished to show that syphilis had addled Mussolini's brain, causing him to go insane, but analysis of brain matter showed no signs of the disease. After being laid to rest in an unmarked grave, 3 young fascist sympathizers would exhume his body, attempting to evade authorities. His rotting corpse spent 16 weeks being moved place to place, mainly between monasteries and convents, until it was finally discovered not far from Milan, though with 1 leg missing, which to this day has not been found. He was reburied, but he would be disturbed once again in 1957, when he was once more exhumed and buried in the town of his birth, Predappio. The execution and posthumous treatment of Mussolini would receive condemnation from some and support from others. Even members of the partisan group that sentenced him to death would criticize the decision, insisting he should have been tried in a criminal court, even if the sentence was still to be death. The main gunman, Duce, claimed that the judgment made was a valid judgment under a partisan tribunal, but the man who captured Mussolini, Urban Lazzaro, denied that any official tribunal had been held. Another point of discussion was the killing of his civilian mistress, Petacci. She had been fascinated with Mussolini since her early teens and would become his lover at the age of 22, when he was 53. Some believed her to have been an important aide to Mussolini, who helped shape his fascist policies. Others think she was nothing more than his love interest, while one source claims she threw herself in front of Mussolini to save him. Most believe her death was also ordered. The events surrounding the execution are still controversial to this day. Many people, both fascists and socialists, claim it happened differently. Urban Lazzaro would die in 2006, and being one of the last partisans involved in his capture and execution, the truth would go with him. One common claim is that of British involvement in his death. Britain worked closely with many resistance groups within Axis territories, and some believe British special operations executives to have played a part in his execution. Both leading historians of fascist Italy and the American spy Peter Tompkins make this claim. Half a century later, the Italian partisan Bruno Lonati published a book that claimed he had been the one to shoot Mussolini, and that John, a British agent, had demanded and carried out the killing of Petacci, writing, "I said I could not shoot Petacci, so John said he would shoot her himself," while making it quite clear that Mussolini, however, had to be killed by an Italian. Despite these claims and various documentaries and books discussing them, there is little evidence for any talks between Churchill and Mussolini, or the presence of British agents at his death. Mussolini in modern Italy. Mussolini remains a volatile figure in modern Italy. Many view him as the man who made Italy powerful, much like the great Garibaldi before him. Others see him as a tyrant who oppressed the Italian people, and as a mere puppet of the more powerful Nazi regime with which he was allied. Showing how strong a grip fascism still had on Italy over 10 years later, his final burial was attended by thousands of sympathizers who gave the fascist salute, and he was buried in a stone tomb adorned with fascist symbols and a large marble bust. The site is sacred amongst his supporters, and on particular anniversaries, it can receive thousands of visitors in a single day, with roughly 80,000 visitors annually. On entry to the tomb, there is a register book, where many leave heartfelt messages of respect and adoration. The town of Predappio celebrates its fascist history, and souvenir shops peddle everything from Mussolini calendars to wines commemorating the March on Rome, clothing, and posters. The power and influence of fascism within Italy far outlasted Mussolini. the Ordine Nuovo, a post-war fascist organization formed in 1956, worked to reform the fascist party so as to make it acceptable to a modern post-Mussolini Italy. By 1960, they had 10,000 members. The organization would go on to participate in the Years of Lead, 20 years of intense political violence, as fascist and socialist paramilitaries battled it out in the streets of Italy, participating in street battles, planting bombs, and committing assassinations of journalists and politicians. Mussolini terrorized the people of Italy for 20 years. His decisions resulted in the death and imprisonment of thousands of innocents and the eventual collapse of the still young Italian state. For all we know about his bloody last days, there is much that will never be truly proven, that will always be up for discussion and speculation. His story is one common to tyrants and dictators throughout history, a story of a great rise and bloody fall, which has been repeated throughout history and is still being repeated to this day.